In the high-stakes world of military medicine, rank is everything. You have the surgeons who play God, the commanders who hold the nuclear codes, and then you have the nurses, the invisible hands changing IV bags in the background. Shania Mitchell was one of those invisible hands. To the elite doctors at Walter Reed, she was just furniture. But when General Arthur Garrick, the most protected man in the Western Hemisphere, collapsed from a threat no security detail could stop, the room froze. Only Shania moved. Because Shania knew something the generals didn't, the war had just followed them home. The fluorescent lights of the VIP wing at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center hummed with a frequency that seemed to burrow specifically into Shania Mitchell's temples. It was 4 o'clock, the graveyard shift, the hour when the human body is most likely to give up the ghost. Shania adjusted the collar of her scrubs. They were seal blue, standard issue, slightly faded at the seams from too many washes. At 42, she had the kind of face that people forgot 5 minutes after leaving the room, brown hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun, eyes that were dark and observant but rarely met anyone else's for too long. She moved through the corridor with a silence that bordered on unnatural. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound against the polished linoleum. In Ward 4 Alpha, silence was a requirement, not a preference. This was where the Pentagon sent its high-value assets when they needed hip replacements, cardiac monitoring, or discreet psychiatric evaluations. Tonight, however, the air tasted like ozone and panic. "Move it. Mitchell, you're blocking the corridor." The voice boomed from behind her. "Doctor." Gregory Banning swept past, his white coat billowing like a cape. Banning was the chief of trauma surgery, a man who treated the operating theater like a stage and the nurses like props. He didn't wait for her to apologize. He simply assumed the space belonged to him. "Dr. Banning," Shania murmured, stepping aside, clutching a tray of sterile gauze. "We have a code black inbound," Banning barked over his shoulder to his trailing entourage of residents. "4-star General Arthur Garrick, incoming from a diplomatic summit in Brussels. Initial reports say severe fatigue and respiratory distress. I want the telemetry unit prepped yesterday." Shania felt a cold prickle at the base of her neck. Arthur Garrick, the commander of U.S. European Command, the man currently orchestrating the de-escalation of the crisis in the Baltic Sea. If he was here, the situation was worse than fatigue. She followed the group, keeping her distance. Her job tonight was supposed to be simple monitor vitals for the post-ops in rooms 402 and 404, but the gravity of Garrick's arrival pulled everyone into its orbit. The double doors at the end of the hallway burst open. It wasn't just a gurney, it was an invasion. 6 men in dark suits, diplomatic security service, flanked the stretcher, their hands hovering near their waistbands, eyes scanning the sterile environment for threats that shouldn't exist in a hospital. In the center lay General Garrick. He looked smaller than he did on CNN. The uniform was cut away, revealing a chest heaving with desperate, jagged breaths. His skin was the color of wet ash. O2 stats are dropping 88% and falling, a paramedic shouted, steering the gurney toward the trauma bay. "Get him on the monitors," Banning commanded, snapping on blue nitrile gloves. "I want a full chem panel, cardiac enzymes, and a toxicity screen. Move." The trauma bay became a chaotic ballet of controlled violence. Nurses stripped lines, residents shouted readings, and machines began to scream urgent, rhythmic warnings. Shania stood near the supply cart, ready to hand over epinephrine or intubation kits, but she remained outside the circle of power. She watched She watched in a way the others didn't. Banning was looking at the monitors. The residents were looking at Banning. The security detail was looking at the door. Shania was looking at the general's hands. They were trembling, not the gross motor tremor of shock or cold, but a minute, fasciculating twitch of the fingers, specifically the ring and pinky fingers on his left hand. It was a rhythmic tapping against the rail of the gurney. Tap, 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 tap. Her gaze shifted to his neck. The jugular vein wasn't just distended, it was pulsing with an irregular, fluttery beat that didn't match the ECG monitor beeping beside him. ST elevation in V1 through V4, Banning shouted. It's a massive anterior MI. He's having a heart attack. Load 300 of aspirin and get me the cath lab on the line. We need to stent him now. Sir, a young resident stammered. His blood pressure is bottoming out. 70/40. Cardiogenic shock. Banning dismissed. Push pressers. Let's move. The team surged forward to transport the general to the catheterizations lab. It was a textbook diagnosis. The symptoms fit perfectly. Chest pain, difficulty breathing, EKG changes. Stop, Shania said. The word was soft, but it cut through the noise like a scalpel. Nobody heard her. The gurney wheels squeaked as they began to roll. Stop, Shania shouted, her voice cracking with a sudden, rare intensity. She stepped directly into the path of the gurney, blocking Dr. Banning. The room went silent. Banning stopped, his face flushing a deep, angry red. He looked at the nurse as if a vending machine had just started speaking Latin. Excuse me, Banning hissed, his voice dangerously low. Get out of the way. Mitchell, you are obstructing a critical patient. It's not a heart attack, Shania said, her voice trembling slightly but her eyes locked on the general. If you give him blood thinners or take him to the cath lab, you will kill him in less than 5 minutes. Banning laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Oh, and I suppose the nurse who cleans up vomit has a better diagnosis than the chief of trauma move. Now, or you're fired. Look at his pupils, Shania said, pointing a shaking finger at the general. And look at his left hand. He's not tapping from pain. It's a neurological spasm. Banning didn't look. He shoved the gurney forward, the metal rail hitting Shania's hip. Security, remove this woman. 2 of the DSS agents stepped forward, their faces impassive. One reached for Shania's arm. It's tetrodotoxin masked with a beta blocker agent. Shania screamed, desperate now as the agent's grip tightened on her bicep. He was poisoned. Look at the injection site behind his ear. Check behind his ear. The specific detail behind the ear made Colonel Witt, the general's chief of staff who had been hovering silently in the corner, freeze. Witt was a man who had seen combat in 3 decades. He knew the difference between hysteria and intelligence. Hold on, Witt commanded. His voice was gravel and iron. Colonel, we have no time for this insane. Banning began. I said, hold on, Witt snapped. He stepped up to the gurney, pushing past the fuming doctor. He looked at Shania. Really looked at her. For the first time. Behind the ear. Small puncture, Shania said, breathing hard. Likely a micro-needle. It mimics a myocardial infarction perfectly until the diaphragm paralyzes and he suffocates. The blood thinners will accelerate the toxin's spread. Witt bent down over the general. He tilted Garrick's head to the side, pushing back the silver hair. There, just behind the lobe of the left ear, was a tiny, red pinpoint mark, barely visible against the pale skin. A faint purple bruise was already blooming around it in a starburst pattern. The room went deathly still. The only sound was the frantic beeping of the heart monitor. which was now beginning to slow down, not in the way a heart attack slows, but in the terrifying, rhythmic deceleration of a shutting down system. Banning stared at the mark, his mouth opening and closing. "He's not dying of a heart attack," Shania whispered, stepping out of the agent's grip. "He's being assassinated, and the killer is likely still close enough to trigger the secondary binary agent." The silence in the trauma bay shattered instantly, replaced by a new, more terrified frequency. Colonel Witt drew his sidearm. It was a fluid motion, practiced and terrifying in a hospital setting. "Seal the room," Witt roared. "Nobody in or out, lock down the floor." The DSS agents fanned out, weapons drawn, pointing them not at an external enemy, but covering the exits. "Doctor." Banning backed away, his hands up, his arrogance evaporating into sweat. I didn't know," Banning stammered. "The EKG." "Shut up," Witt said. He turned to Shania. You know what this is. Can you stop it?" Shania moved to the gurney. The fear was still there, churning in her gut, but a different part of her brain had engaged a cold, analytical engine she hadn't revved in years. She placed her fingers on the general's neck. His skin was cooling rapidly. "It's a binary poison," Shania explained, her hands flying over the medical cart, discarding the aspirin and heparin Banning had prepared. "The first stage mimics cardiac arrest to get him onto the operating table. The second stage triggers when his heart rate drops below 40. Or," she paused, glancing at the overhead lights, "or via an external electronic signal." "Electronic?" Witt asked, scanning the room. "A remote trigger to release a capsule already in his bloodstream, or to activate the compound chemically," Shania said. She grabbed a syringe of atropine and another of naloxone. "I'm guessing, I don't know the specific strain, but if it's Eastern European in origin, they usually base it on a synthetic opioid neurotoxin blend. I need to keep his heart rate up, not stabilize it." "He's at 42 beats per minute," the resident yelled from the monitor. "He's crashing," Banning screamed, his professional instincts warring with his confusion. "You can't give him atropine with that ST elevation. You'll blow his heart out." "His heart is fine," Shania snapped, uncapping the needle with her teeth. "His brain is forgetting how to tell it to beat." She jammed the needle into the general's thigh, bypassing the IV line for direct intramuscular absorption. "Come on." "Arthur," she whispered, using his first name. A transgression that would have had her fired an hour ago, for 10 agonizing seconds. Nothing happened. The monitor beeped, 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 slowing to a crawl. 38, 36. "It's not working," Witt said, his voice tight. "It's the second agent." Shania realized. She looked around the room frantically. Her eyes landed on the general's wrist. He was wearing a smartwatch, a high-end, ruggedized, tactical model. The screen of the watch was flashing red, a slow, pulsing rhythm. "The watch," Shania said. "Take it off." "Now." Witt didn't hesitate. He grabbed the general's wrist, but the clasp was complex, a locking military mechanism. "Cut it," Shania yelled. Witt holstered his weapon and pulled a tactical knife from his belt. He sawed through the rubber strap. As soon as the watch came free, he hurled it across the room. It hit the far wall with a clatter. Boom! It wasn't a large explosion, more like a heavy firecracker. A localized concussive pop. But it released a cloud of fine, blue dust into the corner of the room. "Don't breathe it!" Shania yelled, pulling the sheet over the general's face and diving to cover him with her own body. The DSS agents coughed, retreating from the blue haze. The ventilation system hummed. pulling the particulate matter up into the vents, underneath the sheet. Shania felt the general's chest heave. A gasp. A violent, racking cough. Heart rate rising. The resident shouted, his voice cracking. 50. 60. 75. Shania pulled the sheet back. General Garrick's eyes were open. They were bloodshot, terrified, and unfocused, but they were alive. He looked up, his vision swimming, and locked onto the face hovering above him. Not the famous surgeon, not his loyal colonel, but the tired-looking woman in the seal blue scrubs. Easy, Shania soothed, her hand resting on his forehead. You're back. Breathe. Colonel Witt walked over, kicking the charred remnants of the smartwatch strap away. He looked at the blue dust settling on the floor. Then at Shania. His expression had shifted from suspicion to a dangerous curiosity. That watch was issued to him this morning by the quartermaster in Brussels, Witt said quietly. Secure line. Tamper-proof. Someone swapped it, Shania said, checking the general's pupil dilation. Or someone compromised the supply chain. You know a hell of a lot about assassination protocols for a nurse who changes IV bags, Witt said. He moved closer, towering over her. Tetrodotoxin, binary triggers, electronic activation. That's not taught in nursing school. Ms. Mitchell. Shania stiffened. She busied herself with the blood pressure cuff, avoiding his gaze. I read a lot. Colonel, medical journals. Bullshit, Witt said. He leaned in, lowering his voice so the shaken doctors couldn't hear. I know a Tier 1 operator when I see one. The way you move, the way you cleared the line of fire when that watch blew. Who are you? Before Shania could answer. The lights in the trauma bay flickered. Once. Twice. Then. The hospital went pitch black. The hum of the ventilation system died. The heart monitors went silent. The electronic locks on the doors clicked not open, but dead. Emergency generators should have kicked in. Banning whined from the darkness. Why haven't the generators kicked in? Because they were cut, Shania said, her voice steady in the dark. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a penlight, clicking it on. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating Colonel Witt's grim face. The poison was Plan A. The watch was the backup. They just realized both failed. Plan C, Witt muttered, reaching for his radio. Command, this is Witt. We have a power failure in the VIP wing. Possible hostile intrusion. Over. Static. Just white noise. Comms are jammed, Witt confirmed. They're in the building, Shania said. She moved to the door of the trauma bay and pressed her ear against the cold metal. Outside, in the corridor where she had been standing just 10 minutes ago, there was a sound. Twip-twip. Suppressed gunfire, and the heavy thud of bodies hitting the floor. Shania turned back to the room. The terrified residents, the arrogant doctor now shaking in the corner, and the groggy general. Doctor. Banning, Shania said. The authority in her voice was absolute now. It wasn't the voice of a nurse. It was the voice of a commander. Get the general off the gurney. Put him in the wheelchair. We have to move. Move, where? Banning squeaked. We need to wait for security. Security is dead, Shania said. Checking the magazine of the pistol one of the DSS agents was holding. And if we stay in this room, we're next. She looked at Witt. Colonel, you take point. I'll take the rear. We need to get him to the sub-basement boiler room. The old tunnels connect to the annex. Witt stared at her for a second, then nodded, a slow smile touching his lips. Lead the way. Nurse Mitchell. The hospital corridor was a cavern of shadows. The emergency lights, usually reliable, flickered weakly and died, leaving only the ambient glow of the city filtering through the windows at the far end of the hall. Shania Mitchell took the lead. She didn't walk like a nurse anymore. Her shoulders were hunched, her profile low, her feet rolling heel to toe to silence her steps. In her right hand, she held a pair of heavy trauma shears. In her left, she gripped the handle of a heavy oxygen tank she had pulled from a wall mount. "Stay close to the wall," she whispered to Colonel Witt, who was pushing General Garrick in the wheelchair. "Do not silhouette yourself against the windows." "Doctor." Banning was hyperventilating behind them. "This is insane. We need to stay in the room. We need to wait for the police." "The police aren't coming, Doctor," Shania hissed without turning around. "The jammers that cut our comms are also blocking the hospital's outgoing automated distress signal. To the outside world, this is just a power outage. Inside, it's a hunting ground." "How do you know that?" Banning demanded, his voice rising in panic. "Quiet," Witt snapped. The colonel had his service pistol drawn, a standard-issue Sig Sauer, held in a compressed ready position. He looked at Shania. "She's right. Whoever hit us knew exactly how to blind the building. Where are we going, Mitchell?" "Pharmacy," Shania said. "4th floor. We need supplies." "Supplies?" Banning scoffed. "We need a SWAT team." "I can't build a SWAT team." "Doctor," Shania said, stopping at a corner and peeking around it, using the reflection on the chrome casing of the oxygen tank. "But I can build a bomb, and the pharmacy has everything I need." The group moved. They reached the intersection of the VIP wing and the surgical recovery unit. The silence was heavy, oppressive. It was broken by the sound of boots, heavy, tactical boots crunching on broken glass down the hall. Shania held up a fist. "Freeze!" Witt stopped the wheelchair instantly. 2 shadows detached themselves from the darkness near the nurse's station. They were wearing night vision goggles, the green LEDs glowing like predatory eyes. They carried suppressed carbines. Professional, efficient, they were sweeping the rooms, one by one. "2 tangos," Witt whispered. "I have a clear shot on the left." "No," Shania countered. "There's a 3rd covering the rear, near the elevator. I saw the laser sweep. If you shoot, the 3rd one flanks us." "So what's the play?" Witt asked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air. Shania looked at the oxygen tank in her hand. Then she looked at the fire alarm pull station on the wall next to her. Then she looked at the sprinkler head above the mercenaries. "Give me your lighter," Shania said to Banning. I don't smoke," Banning stammered. "You have a Zippo in your pocket. I've seen you clicking it when you're nervous at the nurse's station for 3 years. Give it to me." Banning, trembling, fished the silver lighter from his pocket. Shania handed the oxygen tank to Witt. "When I say now, you roll this tank down the hall as hard as you can. Aim for the nurse's station counter. And then you cover your ears and open your mouth so the pressure doesn't rupture your eardrums." Shania took the trauma shears and jammed them into the wall socket next to the floor buffer machine sitting in the hallway. She stripped the wire, exposing the copper. She doused a rag from the cleaning cart with a bottle of alcohol-based hand sanitizer, wrapped it around the wire, and waited. Now. Witt hurled the steel oxygen tank. It rumbled down the linoleum floor like a bowling ball. The noise was thunderous in the quiet hallway. The 2 mercenaries spun around, weapons raised. "Contact front," one shouted, their voices distorted by gas masks. The tank slammed into the heavy wooden desk of the nurse's station with a sickening crunch. The valve, already loosened by Shania, sheared off. Pure oxygen hissed out, creating a concentrated cloud of highly flammable gas right where the men were standing. Shania flicked the Zippo and touched it to the alcohol-soaked rag. It caught instantly. She tossed it down the hall. The rag tumbled through the air, a small arc of orange in the dark. As soon as it hit the oxygen-rich cloud, whoom! It wasn't an explosion like in the movies. It was a rapid, violent deflagration. A ball of superheated fire engulfed the nurse's station, blowing out the windows and knocking the two mercenaries backward off their feet. The sprinkler system triggered instantly, showering the hallway in a deluge of water. But the initial concussive force had done its job. "Move! Go, go!" Shania yelled. She sprinted forward, not away from the fire, but toward it. "Mitchell, wait!" Witt shouted, pushing the general's wheelchair through the smoke. Shania didn't stop. She reached the first mercenary, who was groaning on the floor, his tactical vest smoldering. He reached for his fallen rifle. Shania didn't hesitate. She kicked the weapon away, dropped a knee onto his chest, and delivered a precise, short strike to his larynx with the side of her hand. The man went limp. She spun to the second man. He was already getting up, raising a pistol. Shania grabbed his wrist, twisted his arm against the joint's natural rotation, and used his own momentum to slam him face first into the wall. A sickening crack echoed. She stripped his weapon, a customized Glock 19 with a suppressor, and checked the chamber. "Clear," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. She turned to see Witt staring at her. The general, alert now, was watching her with a look of profound recognition. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Banning whispered, staring at the unconscious men. You just... "I neutralized the threat," Shania said, tucking the pistol into the back of her scrub's waistband. "The third man fled to the stairwell. He'll be radioing for backup. We have 3 minutes before a kill squad sweeps this floor." She looked at Witt. "We aren't going to the pharmacy anymore. They know we're active. We need to go down. The tunnels..." Witt asked. "No," Shania said. "The morgue." The service elevator was out of commission, locked down by the security protocol. That meant the stairs. Moving a 4-star general who had just survived a binary poison attack down 4 flights of concrete stairs was a logistical nightmare. Witt carried Garrick fireman style, grunting under the weight. Shania took point with the captured pistol. "Doctor." Banning brought up the rear, carrying the wheelchair, whining about the cost of his Italian loafers. They reached the sub-basement level. The air here was cooler, smelling of formaldehyde and damp earth. This was the bowels of the hospital, where the laundry, the boilers, and the dead were kept. Shania led them into the autopsy suite. It was a tiled room with stainless steel tables and a heavy, insulated door. "Put him there," Shania instructed, pointing to a clean table. Witt gently lowered General Garrick. The general was pale, sweating profusely, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at Shania as she locked the heavy door and jammed a steel wedge under it. "Report!" Garrick rasped. His voice was weak, stripped of its usual command resonance, but the authority was still there. "2 hostiles neutralized on floor 4, Shania said, automatically, falling into a cadence that didn't belong to a civilian nurse. "Unknown strength remaining. Comm lines severed. We are isolated, sir." Garrick nodded slowly. He looked at Colonel Witt. "Give her the weapon." "Witt, sir." Witt blinked. "Give her the rifle." Garrick pointed to the compact carbine Witt had taken from the second mercenary. Witt hesitated, then handed the weapon to Shania. She took it, checked the magazine, adjusted the stock, and cleared the chamber with a fluid, practiced motion that took less than a second. It was like watching a musician pick up their instrument. "You're not Shania Mitchell," General Garrick said softly. Shania didn't look up. She was busy scanning the room for exits. "I am tonight, General." "I know that stance," Garrick pressed, fighting to keep his head up. "I saw it in Kandahar, 2012, Operation Red Wing's support. There was a female operative attached to the extract team. Nobody knew her name. Just a call sign." Shania froze. For a moment, the mask slipped. The tired nurse vanished, replaced by something colder, sharper. She looked at the general. "Call sign Wraith," Garrick whispered. "They said you died in a helicopter crash in 14. "A lot of people died in 14, Shania said quietly. It was a convenient time to disappear. "Doctor," Banning let out a high-pitched laugh. "What is happening? Who are you? You change bedpans. I've seen you clean up vomit." "And I'm very good at it," Shania said, turning to face the doctor. "Because it's quiet. Because nobody looks at the person cleaning the vomit. They look away. That's the point." "Doctor." "I wanted to be invisible." "Why come back?" Witt asked, his hand resting near his holster. "If you were out, why are you here? Why Walter Reed?" "Because I was tired of killing," Shania said. Her voice broke just for a fraction of a second. "I wanted to save people for a change. I thought if I saved enough of them, it might balance the ledger." She walked over to the general and checked his pulse. "But it seems the war followed you home, Arthur. And now I'm back in it." Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed against the steel door, then another. Clang! "Open up!" a voice shouted from the other side. "We know you're in there." Shania signaled for silence. She moved to the door, listening. "That's not the police," Witt whispered. "No," Shania said. "I know that voice." She closed her eyes, a look of profound pain crossing her face. "Bishop, who is Bishop?" Witt asked. "The man who was supposed to be in that helicopter with me in 2014, Shania said grimly. "My former handler. And if he's here, this isn't a political assassination. It's a cleanup operation." "Cleanup of who?" Banning asked. "Of me," Shania realized. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "They didn't come for the general. They used the general to flush me out. They knew I was working here. They poisoned you because they knew I was the only one who would recognize the symptoms. They needed me to expose myself." The general stared at her. "I'm the bait." "You're the bait," Shania confirmed. "And I took it." The door handle rattled violently. Then, the hiss of a cutting torch started. Sparks began to shower from the hinges. "We need to move," Shania said. "There's a chute in the corner, laundry disposal. It drops down to the incinerator room." "The incinerator?" Banning shrieked. "It's off at night," Shania said. "It leads to the loading dock tunnels. It's our only way out." "I can't fit in a laundry chute," Banning protested. "Then you can stay here and explain to Bishop why you're breathing his air," Shania said coldly. She hoisted the general up. "Colonel, you go first. Catch the general. Doctor, you're next. I'll cover the rear." Witt nodded. He climbed into the metal hatch of the chute and slid down into the darkness. Shania helped the general into the opening. "Shania," Garrick said, pausing before he slid down. "If we get out of this, the ledger is balanced. You hear me?" "Go," she said, pushing him gently. Banning scrambled in after him, sobbing quietly. Shania turned back to the door. The torch had cut through the top hinge. The metal was glowing cherry red. Through the gap, she could see a tactical helmet and cold, dead eyes. "Hello, Wraith," the voice called out. "Long time." Shania raised the carbine. "Not long enough. Bishop." She fired 3 rounds through the door, not to kill, but to suppress. The sparks exploded outward, buying her a second. She turned and dove into the chute just as the heavy steel door was kicked in. The landing was hard. Shania tumbled out of the chute onto a pile of soiled linen bags in the loading dock holding area. The smell was intense bleach and decay. Witt was already up, scanning the perimeter. The general was leaning against a concrete pillar, looking grey. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the poison was clawing its way back. "He needs the antidote," Shania said, checking Garrick's eyes. "The atropine was a stopgap. We need the specific counteragent for the neurotoxin." "Where do we get that?" Witt asked. "The main lab," Banning said, trying to be helpful for the first time. "3rd floor." "But that's back up." "No," Shania said. "Bishop will have the elevators locked and the stairs covered. He wants a kill box." She looked around the loading dock. It was a massive concrete bay with roll-up doors. All the doors were closed. A large delivery truck sat in the middle of the bay, its engine cold. "We need to get out and get to a secure facility," Witt said. "My phone is dead. No signal." "Mine too," Banning said, checking his mobile. Shania walked over to the wall where a hardline emergency phone hung in a red box. She lifted the receiver. "Dead," she said. "They cut the landlines too." "This is impossible," Witt growled, pacing. "How does a Merc team shut down the entire communication grid of a military hospital without tripping a silent alarm at the Pentagon? It takes inside access codes. High-level codes." Shania looked at the general. Then she looked at Witt. A thought formed in her mind, ugly and persistent. "General," Shania said slowly, "who handled the logistics for your trip to Brussels?" "My staff," Garrick said weakly. "Colonel Witt and Major Sterling." "Sterling is on the exclusion list," Shania muttered to herself, a meta-joke. But she corrected her thought. "Major Davis." "Major Davis," Garrick corrected. "Why? And who has the security codes for the hospital infrastructure?" Shania asked. "Only the chief of medicine and the head of security. And the Secret Service advance team," Witt added. Shania paced the concrete floor. "Bishop isn't a hacker. He's a hammer. Someone opened the door for him. Someone gave him the codes to the jammers, the lights, the elevators." Suddenly, the roll-up door at the far end of the bay began to rattle. The gears ground together, screaming in protest. It was opening. "Cover!" Witt shouted, dragging the general behind the delivery truck. But it wasn't a squad of mercenaries that appeared as the door lifted a few feet. It was a single man. Agent Miller, one of the DSS agents from the trauma room. He was limping, blood soaking his left sleeve. He rolled under the door and collapsed. "Miller," Witt shouted, breaking cover to run to him. "Colonel, wait!" Shania yelled, but Witt was already there, kneeling beside the agent. "Miller, report, where is the rest of the detail?" Miller looked up, his face pale. "Dead, sir. Ambush. 2nd floor. I got away." Witt helped him up. "It's okay. Son, we're here." Shania kept her rifle trained on Miller. "Don't bring him closer. Colonel, what the hell is wrong with you?" Witt snapped. "He's one of mine." "Check his weapon," Shania said calmly. Witt looked down. Miller's holster was empty, but in his right hand, Hidden behind his thigh, he was gripping a small, black remote detonator. "Drop it," Shania screamed. Miller smiled, a bloody, jagged smile. "Protocol Omega. Colonel, no loose ends." He didn't press the button. He didn't have to. From the shadows of the loading dock rafters, a red laser dot appeared on Miller's forehead. Thwip! Miller's head snapped back. He crumpled to the ground, dead instantly. "Sniper!" Witt roared, diving back toward the truck. Bullets began to rain down from the catwalks above. They sparked off the concrete floor and punched holes in the side of the delivery truck. "They aren't trying to kill us yet," Shania yelled over the noise of the gunfire. "They're herding us! They want us pinned down behind this truck!" Why, Banning screamed, curled into a fetal ball near the tires. "Because," Shania said, looking at the fuel tanks of the truck, "they don't want to come down here. They want to burn us out." She saw a figure moving on the catwalk. It was Bishop. He was holding a grenade launcher. "Witt the fuel tank," Shania yelled. Bishop fired. The grenade arced through the air. Shania didn't think. She acted. She grabbed a heavy crowbar from the truck's toolbox and threw it with all her strength at the truck's windshield, shattering it. "Inside now." She shoved the general through the broken window, then grabbed Banning by the belt and heaved him in. Witt dove into the cab just as the grenade hit the floor where they had been standing. Boom! The explosion ignited the spilled diesel from the truck's tanks. The loading dock turned into an inferno. Inside the cab of the truck, the heat was instant and blistering. "Start it," Shania yelled at Witt. "I don't have the keys. Hotwire it. You're special forces, aren't you?" "I'm an officer. I haven't hotwired a car since 1990. Shania groaned. She smashed the plastic casing under the steering column with the butt of her rifle. Red to red, black to ground. Outside, the fire was licking up the sides of the truck. The tires were starting to melt. Bishop was reloading on the catwalk, laughing. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. "Drive," Shania commanded. "Through the door. The door isn't open enough," Witt yelled. "It's a 5-ton truck. Colonel, make it open." Witt slammed the truck into gear and stomped on the gas. The massive vehicle lurched forward. It smashed into the partially open steel door with a sound like the world ending. Metal tore, glass shattered, and the truck burst through the barrier, carrying the doorframe with it, launching out of the burning hospital and into the cool night air of the parking lot. They skidded across the asphalt, trailing smoke and fire. "We're out," Banning breathed. "We're out." "Not yet," Shania said, looking in the side mirror. Behind them, emerging from the smoke of the broken door, were 2 black SUVs, pursuit vehicles. "They're chasing us," Shania said, checking her ammo. "And we're driving a burning bomb. Colonel, get us to the highway. I'm going to the back." "The back?" Witt yelled. "The back is on fire." "Exactly," Shania said, climbing out of the cab and onto the flatbed of the moving truck. "I need something to throw at them." The wind whipped Shania's hair across her face as she crawled along the flatbed of the truck. The rear of the vehicle was engulfed in flames, the tarp covering the cargo burning fiercely. Behind them, the 2 SUVs were closing the gap. Sunroofs opened, and men popped out, firing automatic weapons. Bullets pinged off the metal bed around Shania. She needed to disable them. She looked around the flatbed. It was a supply truck. Pallets of saline, boxes of sterile gowns, and tanks of nitrous oxide for the dental clinic. Shania smiled, a grim, terrifying smile. She crawled toward the tanks. The fire was getting closer to them. If the heat breached the integrity of the tanks, they would explode with enough force to vaporize the truck. She grabbed a tank. It was heavy. Maybe 50 pounds. Steady, she shouted to the cab, hoping Whit could hear her through the rear window. She waited. The first SUV was right on their bumper. She could see the driver's face. She pulled the pin on a standard fragmentation grenade she had taken from the mercenary in the hallway, the one weapon she had saved for a rainy day. She taped the grenade to the neck of the nitrous tank using surgical tape from her pocket. She pulled the spoon. 4 seconds. She rolled the tank off the back of the truck. It hit the asphalt with a spark, bouncing directly under the chassis of the lead SUV. 1, 2, 3. The grenade detonated, rupturing the nitrous tank simultaneously. The explosion was white hot. The SUV was lifted into the air as if flicked by a giant finger. It flipped end over end, a burning wreck, and crashed down directly in the path of the second SUV. The second driver swerved hard to avoid the wreckage. The SUV spun out of control, hit the guardrail, and vaulted over the edge of the highway embankment, rolling down into the darkness. Shania lay flat on the truck bed, panting. The fire on the truck was dying down as the wind rushed over it, but the tires were smoking. "Clear!" she yelled, banging on the roof of the cab. The truck began to slow down. The engine was coughing, dying. Whit guided the vehicle onto an off-ramp and rolled into an abandoned construction site. The truck groaned and died. Silence returned. Shania hopped down. Her scrubs were torn, covered in soot and blood. She opened the passenger door. General Garrick was unconscious again. "He's out," Whit said, checking his pulse. "Pulse is thready. We need that antidote. Shania, we have maybe an hour." "I know a place," Shania said. "It's not a hospital, but it's safe, and it has a lab." "Where?" "My old safe house," Shania said. "It's 10 miles from here, an old veterinary clinic in the suburbs." "A vet clinic?" Banning asked, climbing out, looking like a chimney sweep. "It has the equipment I need," Shania said, "and nobody knows it exists. Not even Bishop." She looked at the burning truck, then at the night sky. "We walk from here. Use the woods." As they moved into the tree line, Shania felt a vibration in her pocket. It wasn't her phone. It was the General's personal secure satellite phone, the one Whit had grabbed before leaving the trauma room. It was ringing. Shania looked at Whit. Whit nodded. She answered it. "This is Captain Mitchell." "Hello, Wraith." Bishop's voice came through, clear and mocking. "You lost your tail." "Bishop," Shania said. "And 2 SUVs. Pawns," Bishop said. "I have 100 more. But you have a problem." "Shania, do I—" "You think you're saving the General," Bishop said. "But you haven't asked yourself why we want him dead, or rather, why we want him out of the way for the next 12 hours. Shania froze. "What are you talking about?" "The summit in Brussels," Bishop said. Garrick was the only one stopping the vote to deploy the new kinetic shield system in Poland. With him gone, or incapacitated, the vote goes through at 9 o'clock tomorrow. "You're starting a war," Shania whispered. "No," Bishop laughed. "I'm starting a business. War is just the marketing campaign. Bring me the General, Shania, and I'll give you the antidote. You have 1 hour." The line went dead. Shania looked at the General. He wasn't just a patient anymore. He was the only thing standing between peace and a global conflict. "Change of plans," Shania said, holstering her weapon. "We're not going to the vet clinic?" Whit asked. "No," Shania said, her eyes hard. "We're going to the broadcast station." "The what?" Banning asked. "Bishop wants the General silent." Shania said, "So we're going to make him the loudest man on earth. We're going to put him on live TV. The Channel 8 news station rose from the pavement of downtown Washington, D.C., like a shard of obsidian against the violet pre-dawn sky. At 3:15 a.m., the glass and steel fortress was mostly dormant. Its heartbeat slowed to the rhythmic hum of servers and the quiet shuffle of the overnight skeleton crew. To the lone security guard stationed at the front desk, the night had been uneventful until the revolving doors spun open. The group that entered looked like survivors of a war zone, which, in a very real sense, they were. Colonel Witt, a giant of a man in a ruined, soot-stained suit, supported General Garrick, whose face was a mask of grey exhaustion. Doctor. Banning trailed behind them, his white lab coat torn and blackened, his eyes darting nervously at every shadow. But it was the woman leading them who made the guard's hand freeze halfway to his radio. Shania Mitchell moved with a terrifying, predatory grace. Her scrubs were stiff with dried blood, and in her hands she held the suppressed carbine with a familiarity that chilled the air in the lobby. "Don't," Shania said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a command that brooked no argument. "Don't touch the alarm. Don't reach for your sidearm." The guard swallowed hard, his fingers trembling as he raised them slowly. "Lady, please." "We aren't here to hurt you," Shania said, stepping closer, her eyes scanning the lobby for cameras. "But we are going to borrow your studio. Take us to the main broadcast floor. Now." The guard nodded frantically, fumbling for his badge to swipe them through the turnstiles. The group moved quickly, a phalanx of desperation marching through the silent hallways lined with framed photos of smiling news anchors. "We're running on fumes," Witt grunted, hefting the general's weight as they reached the elevator. "He's fading. Shania. The adrenaline from the crash is gone. The toxin is winning." Shania glanced at Garrick. His head was lolling, his breathing shallow and rattling. "He just needs to last 5 minutes. Colonel, just 5 minutes." They burst onto the main studio floor. It was a cavernous room filled with robotic cameras, darkened lighting rigs, and a polished news desk that gleamed under the standby lights. In the center, a young weatherman named Dave was practicing his chroma key gestures in front of a green screen, while a bored cameraman scrolled through his phone. "Cut the feed," Witt barked, his voice booming through the acoustic-paneled room. Dave yelped, dropping his clicker. The cameraman spun around, dropping his phone as he saw the assault rifle pointed at the floor. "Who are you people?" Dave stammered, backing away until he hit the weather map. "We're the breaking news," Shania said, her tone flat. She moved instantly to the main desk, shoving a stack of papers aside. "Colonel, get him in the chair. Banning, wake him up. Do whatever you have to do." She turned to the cameraman, who was shaking like a leaf. "What's your name?" "Greg," he squeaked. "Greg, can you get a signal out to the National Syndicate, ECNN, Fox, MSNBC? I can't," Greg stammered, his eyes wide. "National requires a handshake code from the master control room. That's upstairs. I'm locked out down here. I can only go live to the local metro feed." Shania cursed under her breath. "Local will have to do. If enough people see it, the networks will pick it up. Fire it up." "I need a minute to calibrate." "You have 10 seconds, Shania snapped. She looked up at the ceiling. Above the news desk hung a massive grid of lighting trusses, heavy steel squares rigged with hot Fresnel lights. Her eyes narrowed. She pulled the remote detonator she had taken from the dead Agent Miller earlier that night out of her pocket. Then She pulled a block of C4 scavenged from the tactical vest of the mercenary she'd neutralized in the hallway and looked at Wit. "Colonel, watch the doors," Shania ordered. "I'm rigging a welcome mat." She scrambled up the maintenance ladder on the side of the set, moving with the agility of a gymnast despite her exhaustion. In seconds, she had jammed the plastic explosive into the primary winch of the lighting grid directly above the center of the room. She slid down the ladder, just as Banning cracked a packet of ammonia salts under General Garrick's nose. The general gasped, his body arching in the chair. His eyes flew open, unfocused and wild. "Shania," he wheezed, gripping the edge of the desk. "I'm here." "Arthur," Shania said, crouching beside the camera lens, just out of the frame. "Listen to me. We are going live. You need to tell them. You need to stop the vote in Brussels. You need to say the code word." "The vote?" Garrick murmured, shaking his head as if to clear the fog. "The kinetic shield." "Yes," Shania urged, her voice fierce. "Bishop is coming. He knows we're here. This is the only way to end it. We're live in 3, 2, Greg signaled, his hand trembling as he tallied the countdown. The red tally light on the main camera blinked on. General Arthur Garrick, the most powerful military commander in Europe, looked into the lens. He looked like a man who had clawed his way out of a grave. His uniform was torn, his face pale and sweating, a stark contrast to the polished image usually seen on Sunday morning talk shows. "My name is General Arthur Garrick," he rasped. The voice was weak, but the steel underneath it was unbreakable. "Commander of USEUCOM, I am currently inside the Channel 8 studio in Washington, D.C. He paused, gathering breath, fighting the paralysis creeping up his diaphragm. "I have been the victim of an assassination attempt," he continued, his voice gaining strength, fueled by pure will. "An attempt orchestrated to silence my dissenting vote on the Kinetic Shield initiative. There are elements within our own intelligence community who wish to provoke a war for profit." The feed was going out to thousands of insomniacs, nurses, and night shift workers across the capital. Phones started lighting up in newsrooms across the country. "I am invoking Protocol 7 Alpha," Garrick announced, staring dead into the camera. "The vote is suspended. I repeat, the vote is suspended. Any action taken in my absence is an act of treason." Crash. The glass double doors at the entrance of the studio shattered inward, spraying diamonds across the polished floor. "Cut the feed," a voice roared. Bishop strode through the ruin of the doors, flanked by 2 heavily armed operatives in black tactical gear. He raised his rifle, laser sights sweeping the room. "Wit. Cover." Shania screamed. Colonel Witt didn't hesitate. He flipped the heavy oak news desk forward with a roar of effort, creating a barricade for the general and Banning. Bullets sparked off the metal frame of the desk, sending splinters flying. Shania didn't take cover. Instead, she sprinted laterally across the room, drawing Bishop's fire away from the general. "You," Bishop yelled, tracking her movement. "You should have died in Kandahar. Wraith." Shania dove behind a camera pedestal as rounds chewed up the floor where she had been standing. She checked the detonator in her hand. The red light was solid, armed. "I did die in Kandahar. Bishop," she shouted back, her voice echoing in the studio. "This," she pointed a thumb at her own chest. "This is just the ghost, coming back to haunt you." Bishop laughed, a cold, harsh bark. He signaled his men to flank the desk. "It's over. Shania, the feed is local. We can kill everyone here and spin the story before morning. You're just a nurse with a gun. You're out of your league." He stepped forward, moving directly into the center of the room, right under the main lighting array, aiming to execute the general personally. Shania peeked out from behind the camera. She saw Bishop standing on her mark. She saw the arrogance in his posture. "You're right," Shania said softly. "I am just a nurse." She pressed her thumb down on the button. Click. The C4 charge on the winch detonated with a sharp crack. The steel cable snapped, whipping through the air like a lash. Gravity took over. The massive grid of steel lights, weighing nearly half a ton, plummeted. Bishop looked up. His eyes widened, reflecting the falling metal. He opened his mouth to scream, but there was no time. Wham! The rig slammed into the floor with a bone-jarring impact, pinning Bishop and one of his operatives underneath a tangled mess of steel and shattered glass. The studio shook as if an earthquake had hit. The third operative, stunned by the collapse, stumbled backward. Wit popped up from behind the overturned desk. He raised his pistol, his aim steady despite the chaos. Bang! Bang! 2 clean shots to the chest. The operative crumpled. Silence crashed back into the room, heavy and absolute, broken only by the whir of the camera cooling fans and the settling of dust. Shania stood up slowly. Her body ached, every old scar and new bruise screaming in protest. She walked over to the wreckage of the lighting rig. There was no movement underneath. She turned to the camera. It was still running. The red light was still on. Greg, the cameraman, was cowering behind his equipment, but had kept the frame steady. Shania walked up to the lens. She saw her own reflection in the glass, blood on her cheek, hair escaping her bun, eyes dark and tired. "My name is Shania Mitchell," she said to the silent, watching world. "I'm a nurse at Walter Reed." She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and hovered over the power switch, and I just clocked out. The screen went black. So, what happened next? The broadcast stopped the vote. The footage of General Garrick saved Europe from a manufactured war. But what about Shania after the police arrived? Shania Mitchell vanished. No arrest records, no interviews. The hospital claims she never worked there. General Garrick retired a week later, citing health reasons. But rumor has it, if you look closely at the security detail of the new president, you might see a woman with a severe bun and observant eyes standing in the back. She's not a nurse anymore, but she's still saving lives. That's the incredible story of the nurse who was more than she seemed. If you enjoyed this roller coaster, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more true-to-life drama stories. Share this video if you think nurses are the real heroes. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.